Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Chudin. I am the outreach coordinator for SACOG. And before we kick off and get into the blueprint or the MTPSES, I figured I should probably give a bit of an explanation on who SACOG is. So SACOG, or the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, is our region's metropolitan planning organization. This is where local government leaders come together across the region to advance the goals of economic prosperity, connected communities, and vibrant places. SACOG works in collaboration with 6 counties and 22 cities, as seen on the map before you. And they work with them in the region to solve challenges that are too big for any one jurisdiction to solve on their own. We also play a central role in transportation, housing, air quality, and the protection of the region's agricultural and natural resources. Our primary responsibility as the Metropolitan Planning Organization is to update the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategies every 4 years. This update has been renamed for a number of reasons, partially because it's a mouthful to say the MTP-SES every time, to the 2025 blueprint. So moving forward, the MTP-SES and the blueprint are the same. And like I mentioned, the plan area includes the 6 counties of El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba, and the 22 cities within. I'd also like to acknowledge that we work very closely with our regional transportation planning agencies in the region, EDCTC, or the El Dorado County Transportation Commission, and PCTPA, the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. I'd also like to note that while we're approximately 6,000 square miles large, our region, we do not include the Tahoe Basin, as you can see in the right-hand corner of your screen. Okay, so let's get into what is the blueprint. The blueprint is a long-range transportation and land use plan that looks out into 2050. It's also an acknowledgement that we do not live our lives in just one neighborhood, one city, or one county, so we have to plan for the future of the region together. It's also important to note that the MTP-SES, or the 2025 blueprint, is a federal and state requirement, and we must meet a number of goals, one of those being the 19% greenhouse gas reduction target in order to maintain our access to funding for the region. And then next slide, please. And this blueprint is centered on the triple bottom line framework, which sets us up for a strong economy, a healthy environment, and mobility options for all residents. Slide, please. Perfect. So to kick off this process, SACOG projects that the region will grow by nearly 600,000 people. We'll add over just 260,000 new jobs and about 280,000 new homes by the year 2050. This is roughly 25% overall growth. And so what does that growth look like? Well, the land use assumptions direct growth towards existing communities, with about 2/3 of new homes occurring in centers and corridors in established communities. This does a number of things, including reinvigorating existing commercial corridors, utilizing existing streets and utilities or other assets, and ultimately can provide shorter trips overall, which sometimes can be made by walking or biking rather than being reliant on your car. This is good news. The 2/3 has been the trend over the region for the last 5 to 10 years. However, to get housing built in areas like centers and corridors and established communities will take intentional action. And the pandemic really accelerated the need to have a better jobs housing balance across the region so that jobs are closer to homes. So what type of growth? Well, we currently, as a region, have a large stock of single-family homes in the region, and we need to build more attached products like apartments, townhomes, and duplexes to kind of balance that housing stock that's available. To achieve this goal of balancing the housing stock, roughly half of all new homes built in the region between 2020 and 2050 will need to be an attached product, like an apartment, a triplex, etc. This means that 36% of all homes in the region will be attached products by 2050. This portion of attached housing growth still remains lower than the state average and still leaves room for significant growth in single-family homes, given that we're planning for robust housing growth overall. And it also, with the increase of attached products, it's important and it's based on trends and data. Household compositions over time has significantly changed. Back in the 60s, nearly half of all households consisted of your typical nuclear family. That means your two-parent household with 2.5 children. However, today, adults living alone or with roommates make up the majority, and we expect that trend to continue. Sorry, quick water break. Perfect. So we kind of talked about the land use assumptions. And really, just to give a broader, a higher level step back of what the land use assumptions are, it basically details the spatial distribution of regional growth assumptions. So as you see on your screen, we have the growth numbers, and now the land use is supposed to set up that growth. They are, by design, intended to be both achievable and ambitious and are rooted in current local plans and based on the latest available data in terms of development trends. The land use assumptions are intended to outline a path towards achieving the triple bottom line goals of equity, economy, and the environment, including achieving our greenhouse gas targets, that 19% reduction that I had discussed earlier. And then the transportation projects are tailored to fit the projected land uses and travel needs of the region into 2050. The plan then identifies targeted transportation investments, including new capital improvements and policies like roadway pricing strategies and other multimodal benefits aimed at connecting housing to jobs while managing congestion and addressing forecasted travel volumes. Next slide, please. Perfect. So now we're on to the Sustainable Community Strategies part, the SES part of the blueprint. So under SB 375, SACOG is required to adopt a sustainable community strategy as a part of every metropolitan transportation plan update. And if we achieve this SES, the Sustainable Community Strategies, that 19% greenhouse gas reduction, it will align our transportation, housing, and land use decisions that reach those 19% greenhouse gas reductions. And those targets were set forth by CARB, the California Air Resource Board. Perfect. And with that, I will hand it over to Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Parker. I'm a principal at Ascent. We're the firm hired by SACOG to help them with the environmental review of the blueprint. Thank you all for joining us today for this scoping meeting. I'm here to walk you through the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, process as it applies to our upcoming environmental impact report for this project. So I want to start with a little bit of CEQA 101. CEQA is California's primary environmental protection statute. Its purpose is to inform decision makers and the public about the potential environmental impacts of a proposed project. Through CEQA, agencies must identify and consider ways to avoid or mitigate those impacts and evaluate alternatives, including the no project alternative, so that the project's benefits can be weighed against its potential environmental impacts. When a project has a potential for a significant environmental effect, an environmental impact report, or EIR, is required. The EIR is a comprehensive document that describes the project and its setting. It assesses a project's potential impacts on the environment, and it also proposes feasible mitigation measures to reduce adverse effects. This process not only ensures compliance with state law, but also gives all stakeholders, including all of you, the opportunity to help shape the EIR's analysis. The EIR process generally involves the following step. First, we have a notice of preparation. So when a lead agency like SACOG determines that an EIR is necessary, a notice of preparation, or what we call an NOP, is issued. The public notice informs agencies, stakeholders, and the general public that an EIR will be prepared. It generally outlines the project description and anticipated environmental issue areas and invites early comments on the scope of the EIR, including potential environmental issue areas, impacts, and potential alternatives and mitigation measures. The NOP for this project was released earlier this month on February 5th. Scoping is the next stage, or actually, I should say, scoping is part of this stage, part of the NOP. The NOP process is part of scoping, and it's part of the EIR process. And today's meeting is a key part of that scoping process. The purpose of this meeting today is to gather input about which issues and alternatives should be analyzed in the EIR. Your comments today and on the NOP help us focus our analysis on the environmental topics that are most important to the community. The third step in the process is the draft EIR. Based on the input we receive during scoping, SACOG will prepare a draft EIR, and we're going to help them with that. This draft is circulated for a public review period of no less than 45 days, during which time the public provides their comments. There will be additional public meetings during that process. And then we have the final EIR and certification. After reviewing all the public comments, SACOG will prepare a final EIR that addresses the comments received that relate to environmental impacts. The final EIR has to be certified by SACOG's board before they're able to approve the blueprint, and that's required by CEQA. So now I'll get into more of the specifics on the schedule. We're currently in the middle of the scoping process here. We anticipate that the draft EIR will be released in spring of 2025 with a draft EIR public comment period and additional public meetings occurring in summer 2025. We expect that comments received during that public comment period will be addressed in a final EIR that we expect to be published sometime in early fall, with a project decision anticipated probably late fall of this year, maybe winter. So now I'll talk a little bit about the anticipated scope of this EIR. Given the scale of the blueprint, SACOG has determined that this will be a full scope EIR. And that means that all of the environmental issue areas identified in Appendix G of the state CEQA guidelines are going to be addressed in the EIR. And I'll go over those now. These topics include aesthetics, agricultural and forestry resources, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources and tribal cultural resources, geology, soils, and paleontological resources, greenhouse gas emissions and energy, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, mineral resources, noise and vibration, population and housing, public services, recreation, transportation, utilities and service systems, and wildfire. All that said, if anyone participating in this meeting today would like to suggest a topic that you don't see identified on the screen, or if there's a specific impact within these issue areas that you think the EIR should address specifically, please provide those ideas in the form of comments. So now we'll talk about a little bit about the general structure that you'll see in the EIR's analysis. So individual sections of the EIR typically begin with an environmental setting, which covers the existing physical state of the environment, as well as the existing regulatory setting. And that's essentially all the federal, state, and local policies that would apply to the project's potential environmental effects. The analysis in each section will then identify a threshold of significance. And what we mean by that is essentially a threshold sets a line so that it's clear when a project crosses that line that we consider that to be a significant impact. This threshold also provides a goal for us to mitigate a project's impact when they cross the line. As I mentioned previously, CEQA requires agencies to avoid or mitigate a project's significant impacts on the environment to the extent feasible. CEQA also requires agencies to consider a project's incremental contribution to cumulative impacts, which are impacts that may not be significant from a single project, but may be significant from multiple different projects, all contributing to the impact. So we discussed mitigation measures a minute ago, but we also need to talk about alternatives. Alternatives are similar to mitigation measures in that CEQA requires agencies to identify feasible alternatives to a project that avoid or substantially reduce the significant impacts of a project. Also, similar to mitigation measures, alternatives to a project must be feasible. Another important consideration is that a project's alternatives must meet most of the basic project objectives. So as all of you are thinking about potential alternatives to suggest, please think about those three criteria. The alternative has to be impact reducing, has to be feasible, and it has to meet most basic project objectives. So now we'll talk a little bit about the specifics on how to provide comments on the scope of the EIR. But first, I just want to reiterate that the public participation is a cornerstone of the CEQA process. Your input today and during the subsequent public review periods is essential. It helps us refine the scope of our analysis, identify any impacts we might have overlooked, and develop effective alternatives and mitigation measures. We encourage you to share your perspectives and provide written comments as they will be carefully considered during the development of the EIR. Comments should generally focus on three things. First, the scope of the EIR's analysis. This can include identifying specific resources present or issue areas of concern, or the specific types of environmental impacts or impact mechanisms. Second, feasible mitigation measures. If there are impacts that you feel are likely to be significant, how might the project be adjusted or changed to reduce or avoid those impacts? Third, project alternatives. Are there different versions of the blueprint that SACOG should consider that would reduce or avoid likely significant impacts that would still meet most of the core objectives of the project? And finally, who else should be notified about the CEQA process? If you know other agencies or individuals that you think should be included on the outreach list, by all means, feel free to add the names and contact information as a comment. Just a quick tip, please be as specific as you can in your comments and provide any supporting information that SACOG might be able to use for their analysis.